Hello again! In this video, I got the honor of serving with a cavalry reenactment unit called Horses in Action. The event we served at was the infamous Battle of Brandywine. I'm going to give a brief description of the battle, its outcomes, and the significance it had in the war, mainly about the Patriot Cavalry. So we are at the Battle of Brandywine. The Battle of Brandywine took place September 11th on Bull Days, 1777. It was the second largest engagement in the war so far. So the Battle of Brandywine, it was actually a British victory. It ended in Washington not getting the victory he wanted, he being famous for running away from a battle as opposed to losing it.
You want to draw? Draw! Sabers!
I'm wearing a hunting frock and I'm sporting a saber. Now the reason I'm wearing a hunting frock is Washington did issue cavalry riders hunting frocks. Whether it was a shortage of materials or he wanted cavalrymen to be less recognizable and to be used for reconnaissance, to deliver messages between the units, you had to wear a hunting frock. So yeah, the helmet also, while it's made of really thick leather, it also has chains on it. Now the chains are meant to basically help deflect saber blows. And what was standard uniform of the time was a horsehair attached to it. You could also have bear skin or even deer tails, but that kind of depended on what version you were. Uncovering the stories and mysteries of the horsemen in this battle is what this video is all about. The year was 1777.
Who knows that stuff? Bring down, single file. Do it one more time and then we'll get ready to formation.
So I'm playing a light dragoon. Light dragoons really were the main cavalry force that America had anyway. Now I'm sporting a saber. What's a light cavalry saber? I'm going to say it's maybe 2 to 3 pounds. And it's very sharp. What you have is the curved blade. The curvature in the blade allows a really slick slashing motion. But you can also stab from the front. And you have to, by a command, be able to sheath and unsheath your saber as needed. The Brandywine Creek. Its surrounding countryside consisted of treacherous ravines, rolling hills, and thick forests. Now this landscape made for a formidable obstacle for the British, who were advancing towards Philadelphia, the Patriot capital of the time. Now the rebel defense, meaning the Americans, well, they were unfortunately outnumbered in the area by a large local population of Loyalists and Quakers. This means General George Washington, leading his army, was surrounded by people who sided with the British or didn't sympathize with fighting. Well, this left the Americans with few local allies to provide scouting and reconnaissance to Washington. Without this, he would not know where to lead his forces for the best advantage in battle. Wow, scouting and reconnaissance are two things that light cavalry were usually perfect for. So this responsibility of gathering information and finding out the terrain and enemy positions fell solely to Washington's cavalry. Unfortunately, his mounted units at the time were fairly skint and untrained. Well, keep in mind, this was just before, the army was properly drilled by men like von Steuben. He would train soldiers for Washington just a couple months later in Valley Forge. Well, until then, Washington had a problem. Early on in the war, Congress had not supported the idea of establishing cavalry regiments. They worried cavalry was too expensive, fair. The cost to raise and equip them would be immense, if not impossible, they argued. And even Washington himself stated in 1776 he believed cavalry would not be of much use because the American landscape did not accommodate large squadrons of horsemen. And keep in mind also, Washington and most Americans, certainly his men, were used to American styles of fighting, which was guerrilla warfare. But the loss of New York just the year prior, in 1776, forced Congress to admit they needed mobile cavalry forces. So they managed to augment Washington's army with 4 regiments of Continental Dragoons. These were the 1st Continental Dragoons. They came from Virginia. They were also dubbed Bland's Horse, after their commanding officer, whose name was Theodore Bland. Well, they accompanied Washington on this mission at Brandywine. Now, of course, foot soldiers, infantry, and artillery, they made up Washington's main army. But a crucial group, a group of scouts who would have accompanied Washington on this battle, were not present. They were men who could have really helped him. They were riflemen, under the command of an officer named Daniel Morgan. They were rather famous in and of their own right. Well, Morgan and his men had been sent on ahead to reinforce the Saratoga campaign, which was some miles away. This was not necessarily a bad move on Washington's part, as the Battle of Saratoga that followed would be a humongous, tide-changing victory for the Patriots just after this Battle of Brandywine. But at the time, this did leave Washington exposed. Now, I'll give you a rundown on the basics of what happened in this battle. The two armies met in the rural area of southern Pennsylvania, a place called Chad's Ford. So the British commander was Sir William Howe. This for Howe was going to be the first time in over a year he was going to get to, or his men were going to get to cross sabers with the American army. The last victory, major victory they had, was a year prior when they basically took Long Island, and that was their greatest victory. Understandably, Washington expected Howe to march toward him across the river. But Howe pulled a double bluff. Howe initially sent some of his forces to directly attack Washington's army, but the British general took the bulk of his troops on a long march around and across the Brandywine Creek, above and beyond Washington's right flank. Well, this ended up being a smart move for the British, but unfortunately for Washington, this meant bad tides. This is where the lack of good reconnaissance from his light cavalry prevented Washington from knowing what he needed, which was Howe's proper position. The result was the ultimate clash in this war for independence. The battle would go on for 11 hours, making it the longest single-day battle of the entire war. It ended in a British victory. But in regards to cavalry, this was a significant battle that really would change the face of American cav forever, for two reasons. One, this was the battle that caused General Washington to gear his mind and focus toward realizing the importance of cavalry. And second, this was the debut of a singularly important gentleman in our history, who would be dubbed the founding father of the United States cavalry, Casimir Pulaski. He was a Polish gentleman born in 1745. At 32 years old, he accompanied Washington at this Battle of Brandywine. The Marquis de Lafayette, he was there as well. He was one of the many Europeans Benjamin Franklin sort of sent over to help us with our war effort. Meanwhile, during the battle, back in the battle lines, the British caught Washington off guard. In this precarious position, by the clever flanking maneuver that the British did, Washington knew he was in trouble. Well, when it appeared that the Americans might be overwhelmed and Washington captured, it was Pulaski, who at this point did not possess a rank yet in the American Army. He asked for Washington to give him temporary command of some of the cavalry. Well, we know that this was the 1st Continental Light Dragoons, led by Theodoric Bland. Washington, feeling the pressure of the moment, agreed. He let Pulaski take command, and Pulaski skillfully worked his magic. The young cavalier led a counterattack. Charging in first, leading Bland's horsemen, they managed, sabers drawn, to delay the British enough for Washington to escape. This gave the Continental Army time to retreat and regroup, and the rest is history. Swinging his hussar saber above his head to lead the charge, Pulaski demonstrated what was going to be his famous fighting style throughout the war. He saved Washington's life and proved his capability and his bravery. Well, because of this, Washington assigned him Brigadier General of the Cavalry. He would spend the next 2 years trying to train the U.S. cavalry regiments with the same zeal and temper as von Steuben, who drilled the infantry that winter. And that's the Battle of Brandywine, from the viewpoint of a cavalryman. Bland would be blamed for the blunder at Brandywine, and rightly so, as he was inept at collecting proper intelligence on the enemy's movements. One of his greatest accusers was a young gentleman nicknamed Light Horse Harry Lee. He would go on to be one of the best cavalrymen in our history. The end result is Washington survived. And while the cavalry at first failed him, in the end, they saved his life. Even if it took the aid of a young European to do it.